What would you do if you woke up tomorrow in a stranger's body? Not metaphorically, not in a dream, but literally trapped inside flesh that isn't yours. Looking at a face in the mirror that belongs to someone else entirely. For most of us, this remains a terrifying thought experiment. But for Marcus Thorne, a 34-year-old accountant from Portland, Oregon, this nightmare became his reality every single Monday for 8 months, until the day he discovered the horrifying truth behind his condition and the price he would have to pay to make it stop. This is a story that has never been told publicly until now. A case that was buried deep in the archives of the Pacific Northwest Medical Research Institute, sealed away with a classification level that requires special clearance to access. What you're about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew about consciousness, identity, and the fragile boundary between life and death. Marcus Thorne lived an ordinary life until Monday, March 7, 2022. He went to bed on Sunday night in his small apartment on Burnside Street, the same routine he'd followed for years. Set his alarm for 6:30, brushed his teeth, took his blood pressure medication, and fell asleep watching reruns of old sitcoms. He was a creature of habit, methodical in everything he did, which is perhaps why what happened next was so devastating to his sense of reality. He woke up that Monday morning not in his familiar bedroom, but in a hospital bed, connected to machines he didn't recognize, in a body that felt foreign in every conceivable way. His hands were different, older, covered in liver spots he'd never seen before. His voice, when he tried to speak, came out as a raspy whisper that belonged to someone else. The reflection, staring back at him from the bedside mirror, was that of an elderly man he had never met, with hollow cheeks and eyes that held a lifetime of experiences Marcus had never lived. The medical staff at Providence, Portland Medical Center, treated him as they would any confused patient recovering from a stroke. They called him Harold Brennan, age 73, and showed him identification cards with that name and the face he now wore. According to his medical records, Harold had been in a coma for 6 days following a massive cerebral hemorrhage. The doctors were amazed by his recovery, calling it miraculous that he had regained consciousness with his cognitive abilities apparently intact, but Marcus knew with absolute certainty that he was not Harold Brennan. He remembered every detail of his own life, his childhood in Eugene, his failed marriage, his job at the accounting firm, his cat named Whiskers waiting for him at home. Yet, when he tried to explain this to the nurses, they exchanged worried glances and made notes about possible psychological trauma from the stroke. For 6 days, Marcus lived as Harold Brennan. He learned that Harold was a widower with no living relatives, a retired librarian who had spent his final conscious days alone in his cluttered house filled with books he would never finish reading. Marcus experienced Harold's memories as if watching someone else's home movies. Fragmentary glimpses of a life lived quietly, without drama or excitement, but with a deep loneliness that seemed to seep into his bones. Then, on Sunday night, as Marcus lay in Harold's hospital bed, dreading what might come next, he felt a peculiar sensation, like being pulled backward through a long tunnel. The world went dark, and when he opened his eyes again, he was back in his own apartment, in his own bed, in his own body. The relief was overwhelming. He called in sick to work and spent the day touching his familiar face, reassuring himself that the weak as Harold had been some kind of elaborate hallucination, brought on by stress or a medication interaction. But the following Monday, it happened again. This time, Marcus woke up in the body of Jennifer Walsh, a 28-year-old emergency room nurse who had been found unconscious in her car after what appeared to be a drug overdose. The foreign sensation of occupying a female body was disorienting beyond description. But what disturbed Marcus even more was accessing Jennifer's memories. He saw flashes of her life, her struggles with addiction that had started with prescription painkillers after a car accident, her desperate attempts to hide her problem from colleagues who trusted her with medications and patient care. As Jennifer, Marcus spent a week in a rehabilitation facility, participating in group therapy sessions where he listened to stories of addiction and recovery while trying to process his own impossible situation. He learned that Jennifer had been stealing fentanyl from the hospital, gradually increasing her usage until the inevitable overdose that had left her brain dead on a ventilator. The doctors were keeping her body alive only because her family hadn't yet made the decision to withdraw life support. On the 7th day, Marcus felt that same pulling sensation and once again found himself back in his own bed. But this time, something was different. When he looked in the mirror, he noticed a small mark on his forehead that hadn't been there before. A tiny puncture wound that looked almost like an injection site. It healed within a few hours, but its presence confirmed what Marcus was beginning to fear. These experiences were not hallucinations. Week after week, the pattern continued. Every Monday, Marcus would wake up in the body of someone who was comatose, brain dead, or in a persistent vegetative state. He became Patricia Martinez, a 45-year-old mother of 3 who had suffered massive brain trauma in a motorcycle accident. He lived as David Chen, a 19-year-old college student who had attempted suicide with a drug overdose after failing his midterm exams. He inhabited the dying body of Robert Sullivan, an 81-year-old man with end-stage Alzheimer's disease who no longer recognized his own children. Each experience lasted exactly 7 days. Each time, Marcus gained access to the host's memories, feeling their emotions, understanding their pain, living their final conscious moments over and over again. And each time he returned to his own body, he bore a small mark, always in a different location, always healing quickly, but always there as proof that something was being done to him during his absences. The psychological toll was enormous. Marcus stopped going to work regularly, claiming various illnesses to his supervisor. He began drinking heavily during his own weeks, trying to numb himself to the anticipation of Monday mornings. He researched every possible explanation, from dissociative identity disorder to rare neurological conditions, but nothing matched his experience. Medical science had no name for what was happening to him. It was during his 5th transfer, while inhabiting the body of Margaret Cooley, a 67-year-old woman dying of brain cancer, that Marcus first noticed the other patients. In the long-term care facility where Margaret was being kept comfortable, during her final days, he saw them. Other comatose patients who would sometimes move their eyes in ways that seemed too purposeful, too aware for their supposed conditions, patients whose families reported strange behaviors, moments of apparent lucidity that doctors dismissed as reflexive responses. Marcus began to suspect that he wasn't the only one experiencing these transfers. During Margaret's final day, he managed to communicate with a young man named Thomas, who was supposedly in a vegetative state following a construction accident. Using a series of eye movements they developed, Thomas confirmed Marcus's worst fears. He too was a transfer, a consciousness that didn't belong in the body he occupied. Thomas claimed to have been experiencing transfers for over 2 years, and according to his limited communication, there were others. When Marcus returned to his own body that week, the injection mark was larger, more pronounced, and it took longer to heal. Something was escalating. He made a decision that would change everything. He would stay awake the night before his next scheduled transfer, hoping to catch whoever was responsible for his condition. On Sunday night, Marcus positioned himself by his bedroom window with a camera, determined to document whatever happened to him during the transfer process. He fought against sleep, consuming energy drinks and coffee, pacing his small apartment as midnight approached. At exactly 3:17 a.m., he heard a sound that made his blood freeze. The soft whisper of his apartment door opening. 3 figures in medical scrubs entered his apartment. Moving with practiced efficiency, they wore surgical masks and carried a metal briefcase that looked like medical equipment. Marcus tried to run, to fight, to scream, but his body wouldn't respond. He realized with growing horror that he had been drugged somehow, probably through his water supply or the food he had eaten earlier. The lead figure, a woman with cold gray eyes above her mask, approached him with a syringe containing a luminous blue fluid. As the needle entered his neck, Marcus felt his consciousness being pulled away from his body, but this time he remained partially aware of the process. He could see his own body from outside, could observe the team connecting him. to a portable machine that hummed with electronic activity. Through the haze of whatever drug they had given him, Marcus heard fragments of conversation. The woman referred to him as Subject 14. Another voice mentioned something about consciousness mapping and neural pathway replication. A third person discussed success rates and the importance of maintaining the host bodies in stable condition for optimal transfer duration. As his awareness faded, Marcus realized the terrifying truth. He was part of some kind of medical experiment, a test subject in research that was pushing the boundaries of consciousness itself. The question that haunted him as darkness took hold was whether he would ever see his own body again, or if this time the transfer would be permanent. Marcus awoke in the body of Kevin Morrison, a 31-year-old construction worker who had fallen from scaffolding and suffered severe brain trauma. But this time was different. Kevin's body was stronger than the others had been, less damaged, and Marcus found that he retained more of his own motor control and cognitive abilities. More importantly, Kevin's accident had occurred near a construction site that was affiliated with the Pacific Northwest Medical Research Institute. Using Kevin's access badge, which was still in the wallet of his personal effects, Marcus gained entry to the research facility during visiting hours. What he discovered in the sub-basement laboratories was beyond his worst nightmares. Row after row of unconscious subjects, both those whose bodies were being borrowed and those whose consciousness was being transferred, connected to machines that monitored brain activity and maintained life support functions. The research was being conducted under the direction of Dr. Helena Voss, a neuroscientist who had been working on consciousness transfer technology for the military. According to the files Marcus accessed, the project was designed to allow soldiers to operate in the bodies of enemy combatants, gathering intelligence without risking their own physical forms. But the research had evolved into something far more sinister. Dr. Voss had discovered that consciousness could be temporarily extracted and stored, then implanted into brain-damaged hosts whose own consciousness was either absent or severely diminished. The subjects chosen for transfer were individuals who lived alone, had few social connections, and whose disappearances would be unlikely to trigger extensive investigations. Marcus fit the profile perfectly: a divorced, antisocial accountant with no close friends or family members who would notice his weekly absences. The most horrifying discovery was that the transfers were becoming more frequent and lasting longer. Dr. Voss's notes indicated that prolonged consciousness separation was causing permanent damage to the subjects' original bodies. Several early test subjects had died when their consciousness could no longer successfully reintegrate with their physical form. Marcus was approaching that critical threshold, but there was something else in the files, something that gave Marcus hope. Dr. Voss had been keeping detailed records of each transfer, including the exact neurochemical processes required to reverse the separation permanently. The blue serum that initiated the transfers had an antidote, a red compound that could sever the consciousness mapping technology permanently and make it impossible for the transfers to continue. The antidote was kept in a secured refrigeration unit in Dr. Voss's private laboratory. Marcus knew he had only one chance to reach it before Kevin's body gave out or before his own consciousness became too fragmented to survive reintegration. Using Kevin's construction skills and knowledge of the building's layout, he waited until the night shift change and made his way to the laboratory. Dr. Voss was there, working late, updating her research files with data from the latest transfers. When she saw Marcus in Kevin's body, she wasn't surprised. She had been monitoring all her subjects remotely, tracking their brain activity and movements. She knew that Marcus had discovered the truth about the experiments. What happened next was a confrontation that would determine not only Marcus's fate, but the fate of all the other subjects trapped in Dr. Voss's research. She offered him a choice that was no choice at all: cooperate with her research willingly, accepting that his consciousness would eventually be permanently transferred to a series of dying hosts, while his own body was used to house the consciousness of paying clients, or resist and face immediate termination of both his borrowed body and his original form. Marcus realized that Dr. Voss's research had attracted wealthy clients who were paying enormous sums to experience life in younger, healthier bodies, while their own aging forms were maintained in a vegetative state. The consciousness transfer technology had become a black market fountain of youth for the ultra-rich, with Marcus and the other subjects serving as unwilling test cases to refine the process. But Marcus had learned something during his weeks in other bodies that Dr. Voss hadn't anticipated. Each transfer had left him with fragments of his host's memories and skills. From Harold, he had gained knowledge of literature and research techniques. From Jennifer, he understood medical procedures and drug interactions. From Patricia, he had learned about maternal instincts and protective behaviors. From David, he possessed knowledge of chemistry and laboratory procedures. From Margaret, he understood how to endure pain and face death with dignity. From Kevin, he had acquired physical strength and construction skills. Using this accumulated knowledge, Marcus was able to identify weaknesses in Dr. Voss's security systems and find the antidote before she could stop him. But injecting the red serum meant accepting that all the other subjects would remain trapped unless he could find a way to save them as well. The antidote would only work on one person at a time, and there wasn't enough for everyone. In the end, Marcus made a choice that surprised even himself. Instead of using the antidote to free himself immediately, he injected it into the facility's central consciousness storage system, the machine that was maintaining the mapped neural patterns of all the transferred subjects. The result was catastrophic for Dr. Voss's research, but liberating for her victims. Every transferred consciousness was instantly returned to its original body, regardless of the physical condition of that body. Some subjects, whose original forms were too damaged to sustain life, died peacefully in their own flesh. Others, like Marcus, were successfully reintegrated and survived the experience. The shock to the system caused massive failures in the laboratory equipment and triggered automatic emergency protocols that alerted authorities to the illegal research. Dr. Voss was found dead at her desk 3 days later, apparently having suffered a stroke brought on by the stress of watching her life's work destroyed. The official investigation concluded that she had been conducting unauthorized human experiments, but the full extent of her consciousness transfer research was classified at the highest levels of government clearance. Marcus woke up in his own bed the following Tuesday, the first Tuesday in 8 months that he had done so. The injection mark on his neck was larger and more painful than any before, but it healed completely within 48 hours, leaving no trace of what he had endured. His memories of the experiences remained vivid, but gradually faded like dreams, until he could almost convince himself that the entire ordeal had been an elaborate hallucination. Almost, but not entirely, because scattered throughout Portland and the surrounding area, Marcus occasionally encounters people who look at him with recognition they cannot explain. Former hosts, perhaps, who retained some fragment of memory from their temporary awakening, or other survivors of Dr. Voss's experiments, who recognize in him the same haunted look they see in their own mirrors. The Pacific Northwest Medical Research Institute was quietly shut down, and its assets transferred to a classified military research division. The building that housed Dr. Voss's laboratory was demolished and replaced with a shopping complex. No official record of the consciousness transfer experiments exists in any public database. But sometimes, on Monday mornings, Marcus wakes up with the lingering sensation that he has been somewhere else, lived as someone else, experienced death and rebirth in forms that don't belong to him. He checks his body for injection marks and finds none. But the feeling persists throughout the day. A reminder of the 8 months when his identity belonged to someone else. When his consciousness was just another data point in a research project that treated human awareness as nothing more than software to be copied and transferred. The real horror of Marcus Thorne's story isn't just that such experiments might be possible, but that somewhere, in classified facilities funded by black budgets and protected by national security classifications, the research continues. Dr. Voss may be dead, but her work lives on, refined and perfected by scientists who see consciousness not as the sacred essence of human identity, but as a resource to be harvested, manipulated, and sold to the highest bidder. What would you do if you woke up tomorrow in someone else's body, knowing that your own consciousness was just a commodity in someone else's experiment? For Marcus Thorne, the answer was to fight back against forces that viewed human awareness as nothing more than data to be transferred from one vessel to another. He won his freedom, but at a cost that still haunts him every Monday morning, when he opens his eyes and checks to make sure the face in the mirror is still his own. This has been the true story of the man who woke up in someone else's body every Monday, a case that was buried in classified files but deserved to be told. In a world where the boundaries between consciousness and technology grow thinner every day, Marcus Thorne's experience serves as a warning about what happens when science advances faster than ethics, and when human beings become nothing more than test subjects in experiments that challenge the very nature of what it means to be alive. The next time you wake up on a Monday morning and feel like you're not quite yourself, remember Marcus Thorne's story, and be grateful that the face looking back at you from the mirror is your own. Because somewhere, in facilities that don't officially exist, researchers are still working to perfect the technology that could make everyone's Monday morning a question of whose body they'll wake up in, and whether they'll ever find their way back to themselves again.